Thank you all for coming today. It's good to see everyone. My name is Ronnie, and if I haven't met you yet, I'm the pastor here at this church. And if we have never met before, allow me to quickly introduce myself. So here's a picture of my family when we went on vacation a few months ago. So she's right here. Yeah. So you can see my wife Eva, and then my daughter Haley. She's 19 months. And Haley is quite outgoing, so you'll see her, she's kind of like the unofficial ushers and the greeter in our church. So you'll see her giving fist bumps and then saying hi to people in church. So if you see her around, don't be shy. She would love it if you say hi to her. Haley, go back with Mama. Yeah. Haley, okay, 就把她okay. Oh, but the caveat is Haley speaks Mandarin. Okay, so if you want to say hi to her, you kind of have to talk to her in Chinese. But I'm sure that's not a problem for many of you. Now, every year when Thanksgiving rolled around, we talked about the things that we are thankful for, right? Like our family, our friends, the fact that we live in a safe country, right? Or the fact that you were educated. That's such a big blessing for all of us. However, even though there's so much things to be thankful for, none of us have a perfect life, is it? None of us have a perfect life. I mean, some of you are in university right now. Some of you are first year. Do you guys have midterms going on? Do you have midterms next week? No? No? Okay. So maybe you guys have midterms you just don't know about in 3 days, right? And I remember when in university, in the middle of all of that stress, all of that exams and girls' problems and insomnia, one thing I would use to soothe myself is by doing this. Right? I would hide in my dorm room, I pulled out a bucket of ice cream, and I would just chug it down. Right? I would do this maybe 3-4 times a week. And then one day, my roommate found out, so he sneaked in and took a picture of me while I was doing this. And when I was in first year, before I went to first year, I was weighing 82 kilograms. And then after 8 months of first year, I was weighing 97 kilograms. So 15 kilograms increase in just 8 months. I'm talking about freshman 20. Haley. Hedy, go back. So now, as a pastor, though, I have the privilege to talk to a lot of people who are hurting, and also to comfort them. And I know that for many people here tonight, you're probably thinking, dude, I wish the biggest problem of my life right now is the fact that I'm gaining weight, right? I wish that's all the problems I have, because for some of you, someone that you love dearly is very sick. And you're wondering, where is God in the middle of all of that? For some of you, things are not going well at home at all, right? Like your parents are fighting, your siblings are quarreling, they're very annoying, and you're wondering whether you will still have a family in the future. Now, for my family, it hasn't also been exactly smooth ride over the past few months, because just a few weeks ago, my wife had a miscarriage. It was just after the VBS week. There's a children's summer camp here in our church. And it was actually the 3rd time in 6 months that she had a miscarriage. We've been trying to have another kid because Haley is so awesome. We're trying to have more kids, and yet it's just been very difficult. So that hasn't been going well. Now, for my wife, you can imagine the kind of physical and emotional pain that she was going through, right? She would cry every day. She had no motivation to do anything. I tried to be a supportive husband to her, but then I just really didn't know how to. So I sent her to see a grief counselor, and praise the Lord, that seems to work out pretty well, so I'm very grateful for that. But in the middle of that, I was reminded that the Bible tells us this is a sinful and broken world that we live in. It's a sinful and broken world we live in. The reason it's a broken world is because you can do everything right in your life, and yet pain and suffering will still hit you. Let me say that again. This world is broken in the sense that you can do everything right in your life, and pain and suffering will still hit you. It's unfair, it's unjust, but it will hit you anyways. And then when it does, it's kind of like this big mountain in front of you that you have to climb, but you don't really want to. You feel unprepared, unequipped to deal with all the stress and the anxiety that comes with trying to conquer this mountain, and yet you have no choice. Now, if I'm talking about any of us, if you feel like that is you, then I believe you're not here by accident tonight, right? I believe that the Lord has a message for you today. You can find comfort, right? Because here because God loves you and God wants to help you. I've been reflecting on the story in the Bible the past few days because I'm preaching on it this coming Sunday. And in that story, Jesus said something that was very astounding. It was very crazy because this is what he said. He said, this is from Mark chapter 11, have faith in God. Truly, I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, then it will be done for him. Therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. You see what Jesus said? I read that, and I was like, that's crazy. Like, that's crazy. What does it mean that if you pray to God with sincere faith, God will move mountains for you? What does it mean that when you pray and then you believe that you will receive it, that it will be yours? That's so weird, right? I mean, like, can I pray and says, God, give me an A in math, even though I really hate it and don't want to study? Is God going to give me an A? Or maybe can I say, God, I really like that boy. Can you make him like me? Because I kind of think maybe that's my husband. I don't know. Can God just do that for you when you pray with a sincere heart? Of course not, right? Of course not, because God doesn't answer prayers that doesn't align with his will. God doesn't answer prayer that does not align with his will. But what this story does tells us, though, is that Jesus says when life is difficult, we have to look past the mountain. Or I should say, we can and we must look past the mountain that's in front of us. And instead look at the God who can move that mountain as if it's a piece of paper. How many of you can move a piece of paper? Raise your hand if you can move a piece of paper, right? That's how easy God can move a mountain. Now, brothers and sisters, sometimes I feel like the reason we don't experience God's power and that our spiritual life is stagnant, even though we grew up in church, maybe some of you, you have heard lots of stories, and yet none of those stories seem to apply to you. I feel like that's because we sort of keep God on the sidelines when we're going through stuff in life. It's because we're keeping God on the sideline. We're keeping him one arm's length away when we're going through stuff in life. It's kind of like we treat God like a school teacher. Okay? Like your teacher might be cool, might be knowledgeable. We respect her, you honor her, but you want her to stay in school. That's your school life, right? Once you leave the school building, you don't want your school teacher to have anything to do with the rest of your life. Some of us treat God like that. You're like, God belongs to the church building. Once I leave that church building and I'm in the middle of my life, I don't want God to come into the rest of my life. And as a result of that, I think that's why probably a lot of us who grew up in church have never experienced the power of God. And if that's you today, I want to invite you later. Later on, we're going to have a time where we will have silent prayer time, right, for you to reflect, and also for you to open up your heart and invite God to come into your life, right, and to do wonderful things, to move the mountain that's in your life. Sometimes when we ask God to move the mountain that's in our life, he will move it just like that. But then other times, it is God's will for us to go through that pain a little while longer. Does that make sense? Sometimes when you ask God to move the mountains in your life, he moves it right away. But sometimes it is God's will for us to go through that pain a little while longer. Why? I remember C.S. Lewis once said that God whispers during the good times, but then he shouts when life is hard. He shouts in the middle of pain. It's precisely when you're going through pain and suffering that you can experience the power of God if you're willing to seek him by faith. Because when we go through pain and suffering in life, these pain and suffering are going to bring a lot of our deep insecurities and emotions and trauma and pains and fears up to the surface. They're going to bubble up to the surface in a way that you will never knew they exist. You never knew you had to deal with them when life is okay and just busy. But when life is painful, that's when all of these things come to the surface. Because sometimes the mountain that you want God to move is in front of you, but sometimes that mountain is on your shoulder, isn't it? It's the mountain that's on your shoulder that God needs to move, because otherwise it crumbles you one day at a time. It feels like you're falling apart on the inside. What do I mean? When one of my friends found out that we had our third miscarriage in 6 months, he asked me how I was doing. And I told him I was okay. I mean, I didn't go through any deep physical or emotional pain the way that Eva did because the baby was not in my body. I have really no chance to build connections with the baby, so I didn't feel any emotional attachment. But afterwards, though, as I started to think about it, I noticed that even though you're not going to see me cry or feel depressed over this lost baby, it does seem to cast a weird gray shadow, this gray cloud over my life. And it's because a lot of my fears and insecurities are now bubbling up to the surface when this is happening. So I'm a very ambitious person. I'm a very ambitious person, and if you don't know me, I like to make these long-term plans about my life. And there are two things I really want to do in this life. Two things. One, I want to raise up lots and lots of godly children, and then let God take them to wherever He wants to go. Right? That's number one. And then number two, I want to make a important, significant, and positive impact to society at some point of my life. I have no idea what that's going to be, but I feel like I really want to do that for our society. I want to give back in that way. I want to honor God in that way. And those two things are what I really want to accomplish in my life. So there's a fear in me that what if I just live an ordinary life? You know, like I'm afraid when my time is up, I would have looked back and realized I spent too much time playing video games. Or I spent too much time going to weekend brunches with people. Or family vacations, or even backyards barbecue with people. Now, don't get me wrong, I love doing all of those things, and if you're doing those things, you have to invite me, okay? But I was afraid that one day when I look back, I'm going to realize that those things were basically the best part of my life. And I was worried that it would be not significant enough, that my life would not have been well lived. So ever since I was in my early 20s, when people are, having fun and then living the best part of their life, trying to put up having kids and building a family when they're 30s and 40s, I was the guy running around trying to get married early and have kids early because I want to be kids-free when I'm 50. You know why? Because I figure when you're 20, what do you have? Like you have time, lots of time, you have health, but that's it. You have nothing else. But I was thinking when I was 50, I would have money, right? I would have a lot of personal networks. I would have a lot of wisdom in life. I would still be very healthy, and I'll still be very motivated. I figured that my 50s will be the time when all parts of my life converges for me to make that significant contribution to humanities. And if I want to accomplish both of those things in my life, that means I got to raise my kids early and then go do that important thing later in my 50s. So, when Eva had 3 miscarriages in 6 months, my dream came under attack, right? Because I was starting to realize I'm 32 already, and I got one kid. So there's this voice now inside me that tells me, Ronnie, you're messing up. If you continue this trend, you're going to be a failure in life. So as a result of this, my insecurities start to just bubble up to the surface, right? And you're not going to notice unless you're very close to me. Unless you spend a lot of time with me, you're really not going to know what was going on or notice any difference. But I remember one day when we were in the car, Eva turned to me and Eva said to me, Ronnie, since we had our miscarriage, you have never said anything negative about our miscarriage. And you have never blamed it or anything. And I appreciate that. But I just can't shake the feeling that I have failed you as a wife because I cannot give you kids fast enough. Now, obviously, that broke my heart, right, as you can imagine, because that is not my intention at all. I do not want to hurt Eva that way. But it was also a wake-up call for me because I noticed God was using this instance to remind me, to tell me, to reveal to me that for a long time I have been using my accomplishment to justify my existence. Right? I have been using my accomplishment to justify my existence instead of trusting God. And Jesus used this experience to say to me, Ronnie, you, even though you don't have a mountain in front of you right now, you're carrying them on your shoulder, and you got to come to me by faith and let me live that out of your life. And I believe Jesus is saying the same thing to many of you in this room today. Many of you probably don't have a mountain in front of you right now, but maybe you're carrying on your shoulder, right? You're pursuing things in life that are not going to satisfy you the way that only God can. I mean, like, have you been telling yourself that if you have trouble making friends, or maybe if you have trouble getting a girlfriend or a boyfriend, that you will die a lonely soul? That something is desperately wrong with you? What is that? If not a crushing mountain weight on your shoulder? Have you been telling yourself that if your family falls apart, it's because you're really not worthy of love? It's because you're not lovable, and then life is hopeless for you from there on out. Or have you been telling yourself that you can only trust yourself, that the only person in this world that you can trust is yourself, because in the end, everybody betrays you? Have you been telling yourself that and then just carry that with you all the time? I pray that today, right, is the day that God lifts that off your shoulder, right? That you look past the mountains and that you see the God who can move that mountains.